need me to talk at all? Peanut butter? Hello, welcome. We had a couple little problems, but we got them fixed. Um, Whoever thought we'd be so happy to talk about the tribulation. um, this is the Bible in the End Times. My name is Jerry Greaves. We're going to start with a question from last week. The question was, why is it so important that Israel came back as a nation if God is open to all through Christ? Well, God certainly is open to all through Christ, and it's only because of Jesus that we can have a relationship with God. But the fact that Israel came back into existence is a giant proof that God keeps his promises. And we had looked at that in Jeremiah 31, 35, and 36 last week. And if I can paraphrase it, it said, as long as the sun and the moon keep doing their job, Israel will exist as a nation forever. Well, tonight we're going to talk about the tribulation. The first question that we're going to look at is, well, how long is the tribulation? Now, if you happen to have the charts that we looked at last week, we're going to look at these briefly. And we'll look at them briefly if they come up on the screen so I can look at them too. If not, the first chart is going to be this one, the amillennial. Now, as we learned last week, and I'm sure many of you already knew, millennium is a word for 1,000 years. In Revelation 20, it talks about a 1,000-year period. Scholars, however, always like to add a little complexity to things, so we have to change it to millennium instead of 1,000 years. The is no millennium. So they think in this view that it's symbolic, that it's not a literal 1,000 years. Okay? Now the tribulation period, therefore, you would think would also be symbolic, and it is. There is not there's not a lot of letters in the spelling there, but the church, while it's on earth, is in tribulation. Okay? A good way of looking at this is the length of your lifespan is the length of the tribulation. Okay? Now, the next slide is the postmillennial view. And now, all of these views we're looking at, if you remember, there's many varieties of cats and dogs, and there's many varieties of these views. We're just looking at the basic cat or dog version. In the postmillennial, the 1,000-year period is also symbolic. Okay? And therefore, you would think the tribulation is, and it is also symbolic. They kind of blend together. Okay? They're kind of running concurrent at the same time, obviously. Now, in some, they believe that the tribulation period is completely history and that it ended with the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. Okay? In the premillennial, which is the next slide, this group takes the literal view of the 1,000 years. They say, okay, it says 1,000 years. We think it's 1,000 years. Therefore, the tribulation, to be consistent, would also be a literal 7 years, and it is. Now, how did we get to 7 years? How did we get that number? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. But one thing I want to remind everyone, as I'm sure you all know, all these views have good points. And there's many intelligent, godly people that hold to each of these. And in fact, at Bay Life, I've met many people that hold all of these views. So, but I lean toward the premillennial. And since it focuses on a literal 7 years, well, there's some more specifics to talk about. So we're going to go that route. One reason why I lean premillennial is because, as we talked about last week, Israel exists now. They were destroyed in 70 A.D., and they came back 1,900 years later, and there happens to be a book that is full of prophecies about such an event happening. So because of that, I lean literal. All right? Now, and we also had said that that's a pretty rare thing, right? Last week, that would happen. It's very rare. It's rarer than a man being raised from the dead, right? Do what? That a nation would come back, exactly. I mean, Jesus rose from the dead, and he raised Lazarus, and he raised a couple other people. So we have a handful of people that have been dead and come back. But as far as nations go, this is it. It's the only time in history. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to look at 4 visions that people had. One is King Nebuchadnezzar. 2 visions of Daniel we're going to look at, and 1 vision that John had. And they're all about the same time period. We're going to try to see how they're kind of connected and how each one, as we go along, gives us more detail. And by having all 4 of them together, we get a bigger, better picture of what we're looking at here. So on the next slide, I would like to draw your attention to the bottom port. Well, actually, we're going to have to skip a couple slides. Go to the slide that's got all the arrows and, yeah, that one right there. So at the bottom of the portion, we see it's 7 years, okay? Now, what I want you to note is there's 4 different theories about the rapture, which we're not going to talk about right now. We'll talk about maybe later today. We'll talk about it, or maybe next week, or we could talk about it any time. You never know. It's the rapture. Okay, so, but the point is at the bottom, it's 7 years. And you'll notice it's split in half, 3.5, 3.5, and 12 60 for the days. Okay? Now, in our calendar, we have 365 days because we're on a solar calendar, right? And every 4 years, we get a leap day. The Jewish people did it on a lunar calendar. So they have less than 360 days, and in fact, every year is a little different. And so what happened is instead of having a leap day every 4 years, they would do a leap month every so often. Okay? But so for prophetic purposes in the Bible, it's 360 days in a year. And that's kind of important later on when you guys have to do calculations. So I hope you brought your calculators. Kid, it's a joke, right? I hope. All right, so good, great, we got that. Well, what exactly is a tribulation? Tribulation means trouble, right? Bad trouble, bad trouble. Those are all be acceptable definitions. So let's look at the next verse is going to be Matthew 24. And Jesus is talking to his disciples about it because they've been asking, hey, what's going on? And they're referencing this tribulation. So he gives a little definition here. Jesus says, "For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short." All right. So he says that this tribulation is a period of time that has not occurred since the beginning of the world or until now. That makes it sound like a definite period of time to me. And the reason why I think it's also future related is because he clearly says that this period of time is so bad that unless it was interrupted or cut short, there'd be no people walking around on the planet. Now, I think we can all agree that there has been some terrible, horrific things that have happened in history. But we have not come close to where all the people are dead. As long as we don't think about Noah. Okay? But even that's included as far as it being bad. There'd be no people. Okay. So, and in this chapter, Matthew 24, talks a lot about the tribulation. And he references Daniel and says, if you have read Daniel, guys, because he's talking to his disciples, then you'll know what I'm talking about. So let's talk a little bit about Daniel. The reason why Jesus references Daniel is because Daniel had some visions on it. But Daniel is not just a guy that it's all theory and that he had these visions. He actually lived through tribulation, right? Daniel grew up in a city called Jerusalem. Jerusalem was surrounded, attacked, and captured by an enemy nation, Babylon. Daniel then got to march 900 miles to his new home in Babylon. I think he got his steps in that day, that month, that week, however long it took him to get there, right? Daniel lost everything. And the Hebrew God did not help him, did not protect him, did not protect his family, did not protect the nation. They lost bad. It was not anything like we have here in Tampa, right, in Gasparilla, where the mayor goes, okay, here's the keys, you guys got me. It's a mess. So when he gets to Babylon, what's going to await him? Who knows? Well, when he gets there, hey, Daniel, we're going to give you a new name, so you got a chance to embrace a new God. We're going to give you a really sweet job. You're going to work straight for the king. Life is going to be good. Daniel's basically handed on a silver platter a new chance, at a second chance of having a good life on this planet. He looks at it, and he decides to risk it all and to give it up so that he can honor the Hebrew God who did nothing for him. Crazy, right? Yeah. But God liked it. God blessed Daniel because of that. Anyway, So Daniel's working. He's back on the job now. And King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream in chapter 2 of Daniel. And in this dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a human statue, right? And it's made of metal, 4 different kind of metals. And the head is Babylon. Then the chest and the arms are who? The Medes and the Persians. Sorry. Then the belly and the thighs are Greece, right? And then the legs and the toes are Rome. Now, most scholars believe this is exactly what it is. Now, there's one misconception that I've heard, and I wanted to clarify. This is not the source of the children's song, head and shoulders, knees and toes. All right? But I want you to remember the toes part, because in chapter 7, okay, they'll come back to play. But in the rest of that dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, these 4 kingdoms are annihilated by a 5th kingdom. It's a rock or a stone that comes out, smashes this statue, and then it grows and becomes a big mountain, right? So in chapter 7, Daniel this time is the one that has the vision. And he sees 4 beasts. That's his vision. Now, these 4 beasts represent the same 4 human kingdoms in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. But there is a difference. The 4th kingdom, and that's the one that Daniel always was really interested in, and that's what we're going to focus on too. So if you're like, well, I really want to know more about the other ones, well, go read, but we're not talking about it tonight. Okay? In the 4th kingdom, these 10 toes are now 10 horns. Something has changed in this kingdom. The 10 horns, now horns, they represent power and authority, right? Toes do not. So in these horns, that's one of the things that change. And then, well, that's what we're going to stop right now. So let's go ahead and look at Daniel chapter 7. And there it is. Okay, so Daniel sees this beast with the 10 horns. And Daniel says, while I was contemplating the horn, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth uttering great boasts. So we have another horn. Whoop, nope, not yet. I got to try to, act like I know what I'm talking about here. Okay, so the 11th horn, or the little horn, pops up. Okay, and you'll notice that it says that this horn possesses eyes like the eyes of a man and utters great boasts. That shows us that this horn is to be thought of as an individual and not just some kind of group. Okay? So now the next verse we can go to. Daniel says, I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Anyone want to guess who the Ancient of Days is here? God the Father, right? And Daniel says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion. Now, this term, Son of Man, I'm sure you all recognize that, right? This is the first time it's mentioned in the Bible, Son of Man. And Jesus obviously talked about himself as, and referred to himself as a Son of Man. And you can just imagine when the Pharisees heard Jesus saying, well, when the Son of Man, or I'm the Son of Man, they were thinking about this passage, and they did not care too much to hear that. And you can also imagine that the Jewish people were like, hey, he says he's the Son of Man. And I know Daniel chapter 2 because I am a good Jew. And I know there's a rock that's coming and going to smash the 4 kingdoms and wipe everything out. And then it's going to be great because all human cruelty and sin will be gone. I can tell you, if I was alive back then, I would be like, this is the guy. And it's going to be soon. Right? All right, so let's go on to the next verse. Do I have another verse? Yeah. Good. Nope. No, we don't want to go there yet. We don't. Yeah, we do. I'm sorry. So Daniel says, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Now in chapter 2 of Daniel, that rock comes down and smashes the statue, right? Well, we learn here that, and we did learn back in the verse just before that, it is not an accident. It's a judgment. The Ancient of Days came into court and pronounced judgment that enough. These human kingdoms are not good. Getting rid of them. And we learn here that this is kind of like a big picture, that it's a judgment, and that now the kingdom is going to be taken by the saints. Sweet. So let's go on to the next verse. Now, thus he said, is an angel. Because while Daniel was seeing this vision, apparently he wasn't the only one seeing it. There was angels standing around or someone, and he went up to him and said, hey, what am I looking at? Can you help me out here? And so this angel says, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So here we're talking about, we have the 10 kings again, and then out of this kingdom there will be 10 kings that arise, right? Now in the first, in Daniel chapter 2, when it's the statue, it's the Roman Empire. But in whatever changes in this kingdom, it's now divided into 10 regions of power, okay? But this 11th one, this other horn that will arise, another will arise after these 10, after them, the 10, he'll be different. He'll subdue the 3. Some people think that when they're talking about 10 kings, it's 10 kings chronologically. But this gives us a clue that it's 10 kings concurrently. Because why? He knocks 3 of them out somehow at the same time. Perhaps to make an example to the other 7, get on board, I'm the man. Okay, so let's go on to the next verse. I think I got both verses up there at the same time there. So we're going to go to this one over here that just says 725. So the verse before was talking about the little horn. It says, he will speak against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for time, times, and half a time. So we're talking again about the little horn. So verses 23, 24, 25, and the next verse are all kind of more detail of verses 21 and 22. And here we see this time, times, and half a time. And time represents 1 year. Times is 2 years. And a half a time is half a year. So it's again saying here is a period of time. It's 3.5 years. Now we're learning that now. Okay. So the next verse says. So there it is. All right. So now we're getting a little more detail of the first time the Ancient of Days took seat suffer in court. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away. So the little horn's dominion is going to be taken away. He's going to be annihilated and destroyed forever. Now, that could symbolically mean he's annihilated and destroyed forever. I go with the literal interpretation that he is annihilated and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. So we see here at the end, that's kind of a little more detail of verses 20 and 21. All right. So now, after seeing these visions, Daniel says, I was in shock. Now, one reason I think he may have been in shock is it wasn't like, we watch something on TV, we watch a war movie or whatever. Hey, it's a show for us. But if you were in the military and you saw real life war, then it affects you differently. Well, he had been through tribulation. He had been through a city being ransacked, captured, marched in exile, all that. And he's seeing something that's even far worse than what he had experienced. So it shocked him. And so he as he has a little time after being shocked, the city that he's living in, Babylon, guess what happens there? They get surrounded by an enemy nation and captured by an enemy force. And now there is another kingdom in charge. This time it's the Medes and the Persians, right? The double. They're in charge. And Daniel this time, I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he's thinking, are you kidding me? I cannot believe this is happening again. We don't know. But we do know he's presented with a challenge. He has to decide, do I hide my faith or do I continue to publicly rely on the Hebrew God? He chooses the Hebrew God, even though he knows it will probably cost his life. All right, we're, of course, talking about Daniel in the lion's den, right? Trick question. Get ready to answer. Did God save Daniel from the lion's den? Any answers? Wrong. He did not. He went in the lion's den, but God saved him from the lions. See, I told you, trick question, right? Okay. Something, right? I had to do something, right? Okay. So the Hebrew God does rescue Daniel, and he blesses him. Now, a little time goes by, and in Daniel chapter 2, we find Daniel having a quiet time, or devotion, or Bible study, whatever you care to call it. And so let's see what Daniel chapter 9, verse 2 says. I'm sorry. Okay. So I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So I gave my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer. And I think I put on the paper there that it's Jeremiah 29, if you want to look through there some other time. But Daniel is doing Bible study, and he's reading. He's like, hey, that's right. We're supposed to be here for 70 years. And he's like, oh, wow. Time is almost up. We're getting out of here. I better pray and find out what is going on. What are we going to do? Well, God really likes Daniel. But so he sends him an answer, right? But when you look at all of chapter 9 for Daniel, a much larger chunk of it focuses on Daniel's prayer. And so I'm thinking God was more concerned that we learn the details of Daniel's prayer than he was about the details of this future event. Because in Daniel's prayer, we learn that he had a good attitude, good understanding, and he just had good character, which are all things that God wants from us. I mean, think about it. When Daniel got ransacked the first time, right, and got to Babylon, he could have easily had the attitude of, do I go with the Hebrew God or this new Babylonian God? He could have had the attitude of, well, God, what have you done for me lately? Not very much. Hey, God, if you really cared about me and really cared about my family and really cared about my nation, we wouldn't be in this problem. He didn't have any of that. In fact, when he weighed those things, he said, you know what? I value the Hebrew God more than I value my circumstances. And so we can see all of that in Daniel's life and in his prayer. And since God focuses more on that, and there's a lot of attention given to that, I got to think that that is probably more important to him than did we know certain details at the end of time, right? But that is why we're here. So let's look at them. Okay, so let's look at Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. Okay, now, this 70 weeks is a mysterious 70 weeks, right? Scholars agree that this 70 weeks represents 490 years. Okay? That's a lot of years, right? Each week represents 7 years. So 70 times 7 is 490. Now, just a little stupid side note. I don't know what the connection is, but for some reason I was thinking, Peter's like, all right, I'm really mad at this brother of mine. And Jesus said, well, forgive him 7 times 70, right? I don't know that there's any correlation there other than I just thought, hey, those numbers are the same. Anyway, so back to Daniel. So scholars say, yeah, this 70 weeks, 490 years. So the angel gives Daniel this answer and says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holy place, the most holy place. Okay? Now, that's 490 years to get all this done. Now, let's go through that list and see what's been done and what has not. Okay, you and your people and your holy city to finish transgression. I don't think that's quite done yet. I still see quite a bit of that. I even partake in some of that myself. To make an end of sin. Well, nope, not done. To make an atonement for iniquity. Well, Jesus did that, right? So that's done. To make or to bring in everlasting righteousness. Not quite yet. To seal up vision and prophecy. Well, no, because we're still talking about it. We don't understand it all, right? So that's got to be a future thing also. And to anoint the most holy place. I don't know exactly what that means. And I read a lot of different scholars. They're not exactly sure either. So if it did happen, great. If not, it's a future thing. But most of these things are future. So obviously this 490 years is not complete. Okay? So let's go to the next verse. And the next verse says, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat even in times of distress. So basically what he's saying is, Daniel, this is when it's going to all start. You got 490 years, and then all these things will be taken care of from the previous verse, those 6 things. It goes from the time that a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Because remember, Daniel's right now thinking, yeah, Jerusalem got trashed. It's nothing. There's going to be a decree. You can read about it in Nehemiah 2, because that's where the decree comes from. So from the time that Nehemiah finally gets his decree and goes until the Messiah, there will be, now, here's another interesting thing. It says 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The Bible clearly puts some kind of gap between the 7 and the 62. And do you know why that is? Anyone know why that is? Yeah, and that's a good theory, but they're not exactly sure. But, I mean, there are some theories, but everyone's like, it's really kind of, we're not sure. So now, I don't know if whoever wrote this at the time decided, hey, I'm going to do like Abraham Lincoln, 7 years ago. Why don't you just say 21 years? Eh? Okay. But anyway, so 7 and 62 is 69. And 69 times 7 is 483. You are correct, sir. Now, if you take, but that's in prophetic years, okay? We live on 365-day years. So when you calculate this with the 360-day prophetic year, you end up from the time of Nehemiah starting to build Jerusalem right into, depending on how you want to do your calculation, either the beginning of Jesus' ministry or right up till the crucifixion. Either way, boom, you land on Jesus. Hey, that's pretty neat. Okay? And it says, okay, so that's that verse. Let's go on to the next one. Yes, sir. Back up 1 to 25, right? 24. Oh, 24. Go back one more. Okay. Sin. That is a great question. Thank you for coming. We're going to get there. Okay? Sure. And let me say it like this, okay? I am not the authoritative, exhaustive answer on this. There are many views. And the views that we're going through right now are primarily, premillennial. Now, has Christ smashed sin, stepped on Satan? Absolutely. And are we saints? Yes. Do we sin? Yes. So I'm just looking at that. It says make an end of sin. I'm thinking that's more of a future thing. Also, the 490 is not finished. Even though this was a long time ago, you would say, come on, hey, man. Even I can do that math, right? But it's only been 483 or off the clock. Okay, so let's go back to 25 and then, to 26, one more. Okay. So then after the 62 weeks, right? Now, because we just read after 7 and 62, we can assume already, yes, it's 7 and the 62. It's all done. The 483, thank you very much, is over. And that the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. It'll look like he lost, which that's what the disciples thought at first. They said, wow, we backed the wrong horse. Okay, and then it says, and the people of the prince, this gets a little tricky here, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. Okay, so when Jesus died, before he died, he also prophesied in Matthew 24 what would happen to Jerusalem, right, in the temple specifically, right? Get smashed, pulled apart, and we talked about that in fire. So, and who are the people? Who are the people that destroyed it? Rome. Yeah, the Romans did. And so, what this is saying is that the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So, the future prince of the Roman people will be the one. Okay, he will come in the future. So Rome is to destroy it, but there will be a future leader. We believe this to be that little horn that we've been talking about. And we'll have some more evidence for that as we go on. Okay? So now we're coming up to you here, Rich. All right, and so the next verse, 27. And he will make a firm covenant. Okay. It keeps bending back. How's that? We'll see. Okay, so, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. The he is the prince that we were talking about, also the little horn. Now, this is a famous verse. Everybody, when they talk to Bible prophecy, you're going to look at this one. This firm covenant with the many for 1 week. 1 week is 7 years. Okay? And scholars believe that after the 483 years, prophetic years, or the 69 weeks, there's a gap. Because it talks about how the Messiah is cut off. That's it. And then there's destruction. And then it's a gigantic time out because we've been waiting a long time, 2,000 years for this. We're almost there, man. 483 years are done. Let's get on with it. Nope. We don't know when it's going to start. But this that little horn, the prince who is to come from a future version of the Roman Empire, is going to make an agreement. You will hear some people say, oh, it's going to be a peace treaty for 7 years. Maybe you've heard that. That seems a little odd to me because, Kenny, let's say you and I decide, hey, you know what, we've been fighting, let's make a peace treaty. Well, no more fighting for 7 years. Dude, I'm going to kill you in year 6, right? Because I know what's coming after. Who does that? But it could be, I think, more maybe something like a NAFTA. It's an economic agreement, perhaps. Okay? Because then it's like, hey, we'll work together for a year, and then we'll see how it goes, and then, renew if we like it. And hey, some are for 3 years, some are 5 years, whatever. But the key is not to get caught up in, is it a military or is it an economic agreement? Because what the Bible's telling us, it's 7 years. That's going to be something specific. But then it says, but in the middle of the week, he, who we believe is the prince to come, or the little horn, will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offerings. So, what this verse is saying is that in the future, the Roman Empire, the last, right, kingdom, is going to make an agreement with Israel, and it'll be broken. So now, you can see there's some problems here, right? Because, well, we know, and this is why Bible prophecy people are like, especially back in the day. Well, this can't be a literal Israel because Israel got smashed in 70 AD, and it's been a long time. There's no Israel. We've got to think of something else. And you guys probably, anybody here that took history, realize the Roman Empire ain't around either. They crashed and burned around 400 AD, so we kind of got a problem here. Well, 1948, Israel comes back on the scene. Interestingly enough, a few years after Israel becomes a nation, Europe says, we've been fighting a lot. Maybe we should unify, get together. Miss you, right? And so it's interesting that they kind of coalesce and have. Now, they don't have 10 kings. They got more than that. They got 20-something whatever. And I've been hearing this for a long time because they started out with 6. Oh, now they're 10. Now they're 15. Hey, they're back down to 10, right? Well, now they're 27. The numbers changed. So I don't know if that's the 10 that it's referring to, but also I don't think we should get caught up in that it's got to happen in my lifetime or it's not true, right? So we don't know. All I'm saying is it's interesting that Israel comes into existence, and then after that, the area that used to be Rome comes into existence, and they sign a lot of agreements with a lot of countries, right? Hey, let's work together. Let's sign an agreement. Hey, right? So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, in the rest of this verse, the sacrifices, they say, no, you're not going to do any more of that. And then on the wing of abomination will come one who makes desolate. Well, that's the guy that made the covenant. He's going to just wreck everything. Now, this phrase, abomination of desolation, you might recognize from Matthew 24, which is this one. This is Jesus talking. And Jesus says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken about through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, flee. Now, he says some other things in that verse. Feel free to read it. But the take I want you to get here is, it's serious. It's going to be a bad time. Okay, now, and Jesus is talking to his disciples there. Now, one of his disciples that is there is John the Apostle, right? So let's see what John saw, because he later gets a vision. So, John saying, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea having 10 horns, and there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given him. Okay? 42 months. Anybody want to do some quick math on how many years that would equate to? Right again, sir. It's 3.5. Yeah. And if you notice back in Daniel, that little horn that we thought, oh yeah, this shows he's an individual. What did he have? The eyes of a man and a mouth to utter blasphemies. So here we see, I think it's the same guy. And this time, he's got 10 horns. Now, this is my little speculation here, is after he bumps the 3, the other 7 are like, whoa, hey, we're not going to mess with this guy. And so this little horn that comes up after the other 10, the other 10 say, hey, we're on board, man. You're the man. Okay? So let's see. So now, John's vision is really, really big. We're just doing this whole thing. We're just covering a lot of territory, right? Trying to cover all Daniel and Revelation. That's like torture. Who would do that? People that want to talk about tribulation, right? Okay. So anyway, let's go on to the next verse. Okay. So, yeah, no, I meant the next slide. Thank you. Okay. So we've got some highlights or bullet points, right, for the tribulation. I don't know that really you want to use the word highlights. Oh, louder? Sorry. So, first 3.5 years, Israel has relative peace. How do we guess that? Well, because we just read the verse that they sign a 7-year agreement, right? So for Israel, the first 3.5 years, kind of business as usual, may not even know that they're in any kind of danger. All right? Then, in Revelation 7, there's 144,000 Jews are sealed for ministry. Okay? Now, all views do this to some degree. They'll all say, well, everything's symbolic. And then they'll go, well, but this verse is literal. Or you'll be like me. Hey, take everything literal. Well, maybe we'll take this thing symbolic, okay? Because God hasn't given us quite enough to be so self-confident. But that doesn't stop us, right? All right. So anyway, these 144,000, whether it's a literal 144,000 Jews or if it's symbolic that it means all Christians or whatever, I don't know. But the deal is they're marked for ministry. They're on Team Jesus, and they're doing what Jesus wants them to do. They're going and telling people about Jesus. Okay. So the next thing. Also in this first 3.5 years, the first 6 seals are happening. We think it is the first 3.5 years. Okay, we're going to see seals, bowls, and trumpets. There's a lot of theories about when the timing of these things also. Do they all happen at the same time, or are they in chronological order? You can pick any chart you want and make a good case for it however you want. I go with that it's going to be bad. And when they happen, it's not something that you will, if you see it, that you will forget, and you don't want to see it. But let's go ahead and look at some of the more famous of these 6 seals. So on the next slide, you've heard of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Well, this is where they come from, Revelation 6. Now, are they literal horses? I think not. The first horse is a white horse. A lot of scholars think that this represents, now I put AC up there, but I think you guys know I'm not talking about heating and cooling. I'm talking about, right, the Antichrist. So they think that it represents the Antichrist because it's a white horse. Kings generally got to ride on a good-looking horse like that. He's given a crown, and he has a bow, but the bow has no arrows. So they think that he will take over things, but he'll do it peacefully, slyly, and then the next thing you know, he's in charge. The red horse is war. So even though he's in charge, things don't go exactly the way he's able to plan it, and trouble. Third horse is a black horse, economic calamity. Fourth is pale death. Now, it also says that these 4 horses together will wipe out 1/4 of the world's population. Now again, if that's a literal or symbolic 1/4, either way, it's a lot. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Do what? Right, and it hasn't happened yet because some people will say, well, they could have had. Well, I don't think that we've lost 1/4 of the population to that. Something like that, right? All right, now this passage, there's lots in Revelation we're not getting on. This is another famous passage, right? This is, and he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or their forehead. And he provides that no one be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So when I was a kid, people would say, see, this is why it can't be literal, because you could never have any kind of system that was tracking all the financial transactions like this, right? Or they would tell me this is why the Bible is a bunch of nothingness, because, again, it can't happen. So just out of curiosity, does anybody here think that it's possible that that could indeed go on? Yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, if you watch read the news, some of you may have seen that some of the governments are talking about we need to have a digital currency because it'll be easier to track things. So, I don't know. Maybe the Bible got another one right. All right, we're being recorded live on the internet. Remember, careful what you say, people. All right, but you're right. All right, so let's go to the next verse. Okay, so we're talking still about the mark. It's going to be voluntary. Yeah. Because, now I didn't put the verse up there because I didn't put every verse on here. Hey, we're going to read the Bible, the whole Bible together, right? But it talks about how the beast, little henchman, the false prophet, is going to create an image, and you're going to have to worship the beast, and take the mark, or die. So it is voluntary. But I think most people are going to say, especially if they don't have any clue, they're going to go, well, give me the mark, right? Now, we're going to get it either on the right hand or the forehead. Now, I got mine I went with the hand, not painful, and I got a discount because I was an early adopter, right? I mean, there's going to be a conversation like that. People are going to say, hey, man, it was no big deal, right? And I get a discount. Yes?
Just a silly theory, but
Sure.
most people in the world are right-handed. Most, not all.
Yeah.
Most people in the world also have a cell phone, which also has the technology to have like Apple Pay or Google Pay or something like that on it. So who's to say it's not even a cell phone that you've already got?
Right. It could be, but the reason why I wanted to put up there that it's voluntary is because, yes, the devil lies. He's a sneaky little guy, right? But God, right, he doesn't want to sneak. He was like, look, you're going to worship me or you're not. It's your choice. But he wants it to be a choice. And so it'll be voluntary. Now, I'm not saying that people are going to do thorough research before they make this decision, right? They don't do that now. But we are supposed to help people do thorough research, right? That's one of our... Okay, so anyway, so we'll go on to the next one. Okay, and then at the midpoint, 7 years, the Antichrist assumes control. Now that should say 2 Thessalonians there at the end. 2 Thessalonians 2, not just plain Thessalonians. But this all talks about what we've been talking about, that it's the middle of the 7 years is when we all say, I knew that guy was bad. It becomes clear. There's not any more question. All right, so the next in the last 3.5 years, wrath is poured out on Israel and unbelievers. So if you're not a believer, the wrath comes down on you. And trumpet and bowls. And again, the seals, the trumpets and bowls, the exact timing of these things, your guess is as good or better than mine. Okay? All right. So let's go on. What else we got? Okay. But the wrath concludes with Armageddon. All good things come to an end, and fortunately, so do all bad things. Right? Jesus says, enough. And with a word, he ends it. Same way that he began everything, with a word. The same word, he could say at any time right now and just end it. But because he wants to give people a chance to know him, he lets it go on. So let's look at the next verse. For they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God, the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked, and men will not see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So, the people of this world will be lied to, and they'll be told, we must fight. Right? God's been spending all this time in this book saying, hey, look, let's make peace. But the liars are out there lying like they lie today to us to tell us God doesn't care about us, and they'll be really good at it then and get people assembled to fight. Now, it's interesting. There must be some Christians around, because what does Jesus say? Behold, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and doesn't get caught with his pants down, right? All right, so then the next slide, So Jesus comes back at the end of Armageddon, says a word, done. Next slide. He destroys and judges his enemy. He's been giving them plenty of time to reconcile. They wouldn't have any of it, and he's had enough. And we'll be talking more about that next week. And then next slide. So this is from 19, and there's two things here. You can read all about 19 where Jesus comes down and takes it. But there's two parties going on in 19. This is the first one. Right, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's where we all want to be. The next party is on the next slide. I think. It's on the next slide. Yeah. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying to all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, "Come, assemble for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of commanders, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free men and slaves, and the small and the great." So, you either get to eat at the marriage supper of the Lamb, or you get eaten at this one, right? If you fight on Team Jesus, you get to eat with Jesus. If you fight on the Team Beast, you get eaten by beasts, right? You're either a diner or your dinner, right? Now, it doesn't matter what theory you are, if you're amill or post-mill or pre-mill, we all agree we want to be at the marriage supper of the Lamb. And we want everybody else to be there. And we know that if you're not there because you don't know Jesus and you're not on Team Jesus, you're going to have a terrible, terrible end. If this is literal, it's horrible. If it's not, it's still describing something horrible, right? So we know that just a little earlier we looked at Revelation chapter 7 where it says that there's the 144,000 Jews that are on Team Jesus telling people about it. Well, we're supposed to be on Team Jesus doing that right now, right? So that's what my prayer is for us, that we think of these things and figure out, how can I talk to people about Jesus? Whether I'm using Bible prophecy, which I think is a great apologetic tool, or anything else that you like. I mean, because I talked to a guy and said, hey, look, this book talked about a nation coming back into existence after 1,900 years. And he was like, I got to read that. That's amazing, right? He didn't know anything about it. Most people don't. So anyway, that's all I have. So if you have questions, you can ask them. If you don't have questions but you have a comment, that's fine too. Yes?
I know we have one more day, or one more week of this.
Yeah.
But are we going to touch on the two witnesses at all, or is that?
No, not really. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of things that we could talk about, and that's really interesting. But it's only 3 weeks. So, but do you have a question about the two witnesses?
No, I thought it's interesting because they talk about the 1260 days.
Yes.
They talk about the lampstands and the olive trees, which, there's a lot of symbolism back from Old Testament about what that means.
Right.
So it's really
Do you want him to speak in the microphone?
If you've got a question, just flag me down so I can go ahead and get a microphone to you so that people online can hear.
Yeah. So he was talking about the two witnesses. And see, that's one of the things people go, okay, well, at this point in time, the two witnesses have to show up. And if that's true, then da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, and that all makes sense. But there's so many things like that in Revelation that you can do that it becomes, we're discussing and fighting, and things are like, look, it's going to happen, but the really exact timing, we don't know. The big picture is God's in control, and He's going to do it. And if you are there, happen to be at that time, I think it will become clearer, right?
Jerry, you've got a question online from Clay Evers, who asks, what role does Matthew 24:34 play in your timeline? So I don't know if you have the whole book of Matthew memorized off the top of your head.
Well, I do, except when under pressure. Is Matthew in the Old or New Testament? Oh, wait. Okay. So Matthew 24:34. Yeah. Let's see. Matthew 24:34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will not pass away, but my words will not pass away. So, yeah, I think all this will happen before heaven and earth pass away. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It said this generation, right? Well, when he says this generation, he's talking about the events in Matthew, okay? There's different events in Matthew that you can relate this to. I know a lot of people say, okay, so look, this means it had to happen back then. But there's another passage where there's something similar to that this generation will not, people that are standing right here will see. Well, then you read a couple more verses, and it's talking about the transfiguration where Jesus is glorified. And so you say, well, hey, they just saw that. But yeah, I think you can still say, hey, look, it's a future event. Sure, easily, right?
In the context of the whole chapter, he's talking about future events. So they asked him a question at the very beginning, when is this going to happen?
You don't have a microphone. You're not allowed to talk. Come on up here and give Rob's giving a good answer.
Thanks. I was just saying that this is all futuristic. He's talking about, look at the beginning of 24. He talks about the disciples ask him, when's this going to all happen?
Yeah.
And he gives this, prophetic information about the whole. So in the context of what he's talking about, in the complete conversation,
right?
It's all to me. It seems like he's talking about the future.
It seems to you like it's talking in the future.
Future, yeah. He's answering their question.
Sure.
When's the end of the age? They ask him.
Right.
I have a question though.
Okay, go ahead. You got the microphone. Perfect time.
Just a comment to see. I mean, you and I talked about this before on the phone, but I used to be more of a pre-tribber. Now I'm a post-tribber.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that you look at,
make sure you come next week because that's when we're talking about the timing over that.
I'll wait then.
Okay. That was easy.
So another question from online while people think about their questions. We have one person asking specifically one of the portions of Daniel that you quoted is, they mentioned that it's in Aramaic. And so they're wondering why some parts of Daniel are in Hebrew and others are in Aramaic. And I'll be honest, I have no idea, so I was hoping you've got the answer to that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I read a really good answer on that, and I can't remember. But basically, it was because Daniel, he's in Babylon. Babylon was a global superpower. They were all over the place. And so they spoke a lot of different languages, and that's part of the answer, right? That it was written because Daniel wrote for his audience, and there were certain parts he was addressing to the Jewish audience, and then there was other parts he wanted the whole world to be able to understand and key in. Any other questions? If not, that's fine. You can always write them down. Okay, I think we're done then. But next week we will talk about the rapture, and we'll talk about some other things. It won't be specifically that. And if you have any questions that you're like, oh, I should have asked this, well, then send them to me or send them to Travis, and then we can answer them at the beginning. Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed. If you have, but I'll send that out to you. I didn't have it for you tonight. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.